Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Daniel Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger in these Blue Ridge Mountains for 18 years. My daddy was a ranger before me, and his daddy before him. We know these mountains like the lines on our hands. Every trail, every cave, every place where city folks get themselves into trouble. I should probably tell you about Tommy right off. He was my boy, 8 years old when the mountain took him. That's what people around here say when someone dies in an accident. The mountain took him. Like it's some living thing that gets hungry sometimes. 3 years ago, Tommy fell into Widow's Creek during spring flood. Never found his body. Sarah, my wife, she couldn't handle it. Said I loved these mountains more than I loved my family. Maybe she was right. She moved to Richmond 2 years back. Haven't heard from her since. These days I live alone in the ranger station at Devil's Backbone Ridge. It's an old mining area, abandoned since the 1920s when the coal ran out. Nothing up here now but limestone caves and tourists who don't know better. I drink too much bourbon and talk to myself more than I should. But I know every inch of these mountains, especially the cave systems. Been doing cave rescues since I was 25. Saved maybe 50 people over the years from getting lost down there in the dark. Most locals won't go near the old mining areas. They tell stories about hollow folk, mountain people who live in the caves, gone strange from too much time in the dark. I always figured it was just talk. Scared city folks making up ghost stories about poor mountain families who wanted to be left alone. Probably just some old-timers growing marijuana back in the deep hollers, hiding from the law. The morning it all started was September 15th, 1977. I remember because it was the first real cold snap of fall, and the leaves were just starting to turn. The mist hung, low in the valleys, thick as cotton. I was drinking coffee on the station porch when the call came in. "Daniel, we got a missing family," Sheriff Morrison said over the radio. "Camping at Bluestone Creek. Car's still there, engine running, but no sign of them." Bluestone Creek was a good camping spot. Flat ground, clean water, close to the main trail. Families with kids used it all the time. "How many?" I asked. 4. Mom, Dad, 2 kids, ages 6 and 9. Name's Patterson, from Norfolk. Been missing since yesterday afternoon. I drove up to Bluestone in my truck, taking the old mining road. The Pattersons' car sat there just like Sheriff Morrison said, a blue station wagon with Virginia plates, engine still idling after 16 hours. Driver's door hung open. Coffee cup sat on the hood, still had coffee in it, but cold as stone. Their tent was set up neat and proper. Sleeping bags laid out, camp stove ready to use. But their hiking boots were gone, and so were their day packs. I walked around the campsite in a slow circle, looking for sign. The tracks were clear enough in the soft dirt near the creek. 2 adults, 2 small children, heading north toward Mammoth Cave. But that didn't make sense. Mammoth Cave had been sealed up with concrete and steel bars back in 1965 after a boy got lost and died down there. Big metal signs said, "Condemned, do not enter," in letters you could read from 50 yards. I followed the tracks anyway. They led straight to the cave mouth, clear as day in the mud. But when I got there, my blood went cold. The concrete seal had been broken open. Big chunks of it lay scattered around like someone had used dynamite. The steel bars were bent back, twisted like they were made of soft wire instead of steel. But there weren't any blast marks. No tool marks on the metal. And the concrete chunks looked old, covered with moss and dirt like they do. Been laying there for years instead of hours. I stood there staring at that black hole in the mountain, and for the first time in my life, these woods felt wrong. The air was too still. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the creek seemed quieter than it should be. I went back to my truck and radioed Sheriff Morrison. "Sheriff, those tracks lead straight into Mammoth Cave, but someone's busted open the seal." "That's impossible, Daniel. That seal's been solid for 12 years. "Well, it ain't solid now. I'm going to need my cave gear, And you better send Jake Morrison up here as backup. Jake was the sheriff's nephew, been helping with search and rescue for about 5 years. Good man, steady head, not afraid of tight spaces. If a family was lost in Mammoth Cave, we'd need 2 men to bring them out safe. While I waited for Jake, I walked around that cave entrance 3 more times. The more I looked, the stranger it got. The broken concrete pieces had root systems growing through them. Not fresh roots, but old growth that takes years to develop. The twisted steel bars had rust patterns that spoke of decades, not hours. But the Patterson family tracks were fresh, no doubt about that. I checked my equipment twice. Carbide helmet lamp, backup flashlights, rope, first aid kit, emergency flares, everything a cave rescue needs. I'd done this dance many times before. People get turned around in caves. Panic sets in. They go deeper instead of heading for daylight. Standard procedure was to follow their trail, call out every 50 feet, and bring them back to safety. But standing at the mouth of Mammoth Cave that morning, with the mist swirling around my feet and not a bird singing in the forest, I knew this wasn't going to be standard anything. Jake arrived an hour later, pulling up in his 4-wheel drive with enough gear for a week underground. He was 28, built like a lumberjack, with hands that could crack walnuts and a laugh that could shake windows. But when he saw that busted cave seal, his laugh died quick. "Jesus, it's Daniel. What the hell happened here?" "Don't know," I said, checking my carbide lamp one more time. "But we got 4 people down there somewhere." We entered the cave together, Jake right behind me. The entrance tunnel sloped down at a steep angle, carved through solid limestone by underground rivers millions of years ago. Our lights threw dancing shadows on the walls, and our footsteps echoed strange in the narrow space. 50 feet in, I found the first piece of camping gear, a child's jacket, bright red, dropped on the cave floor like the kid had just taken it off, still warm to the touch. "Mom! Dad! Can you hear me?" I called out, my voice bouncing off the stone walls. Nothing came back but our own echoes. We kept following the tunnel deeper. The cave floor was soft limestone dust, perfect for showing tracks. The Patterson family had definitely come this way. 2 adults walking steady, 2 kids running ahead and doubling back like children do. Normal family behavior, nothing to suggest panic or force. 100 feet deeper, Jake grabbed my arm. "Daniel, look at this." His light was shining on the left wall of the tunnel. Someone had carved symbols into the stone, not recent scratches, but deep cuts that looked old as the cave itself. They weren't any kind of writing I recognized. Just strange flowing lines that hurt to look at too long, like they were trying to spell out something that shouldn't be spelled. "Indians, maybe?" Jake asked. I shook my head. No Cherokee ever lived this deep in caves, and these marks look wrong somehow. We kept going. 200 feet in, the main tunnel split into 3 branches. This was where most people got lost in cave systems. They took the wrong branch going in, then couldn't remember which way they'd come when trying to get out. The Patterson tracks went down the middle branch, but something was bothering me. According to the Geological Survey maps, Mammoth Cave was only supposed to go back 400 feet before hitting solid stone. But we'd already come 200 feet, and this tunnel showed no signs of ending. The middle branch sloped down steep, and the air got colder with every step. Jake was breathing hard behind me, not from the walk, but from something else. Fear, maybe, though Jake Morrison wasn't afraid of much in this world. "You smell that?" he asked. I stopped and sniffed. There was something in the air, not bad exactly, but strange, like old newspapers left in a damp basement. Like things that should be dry, but weren't. 300 feet down the middle branch, my radio died. Not the battery. The whole unit just went quiet, like someone had flipped a switch. Jake tried his radio. Same thing. "Equipment failure," I said. But I didn't believe it. Both radios going out at the same time wasn't equipment failure. It was something else. 400 feet in, we found the rest of the Patterson family's gear. Day packs, water bottles, trail mix, everything scattered across the cave floor like they'd dropped it all at once and kept walking. But there was no sign of struggle, no torn clothing, no blood, and the tracks kept going deeper into the mountain. "This doesn't make sense," Jake said, his voice tight. "Why would they drop everything and keep walking?" That's when we heard the voices. Faint at first, echoing from somewhere deep in the tunnel ahead. A man's voice calling, "Help us!" and a woman crying. Then children's voices, high and scared, calling for their mommy and daddy. "Patterson family," I shouted back. "Stay where you are. We're coming to get you." The voices got louder as we moved toward them, but something was wrong with the echoes. In normal caves, voices bounce off the walls and come back to you. But these voices seemed to be coming from inside the stone itself, like the mountain was talking. Jake stopped walking. "Daniel, my compass is spinning." I checked mine. The needle was whipping around like a pinwheel in a tornado, never settling on any direction. In all my years doing cave rescue, I'd never seen anything like it. The voices were getting closer now, but they seemed to be coming from all directions at once. The man's voice calling, "Help us, please," and the woman sobbing, and those children crying for their parents. But when I listened real careful, something about those voices made my skin crawl. 500 feet into the cave, 100 feet deeper than any survey said it went, we found the child's shoe. It was small, white with pink laces, sized for maybe a 6-year-old girl. Fresh blood on the sole, still wet. But no body, no trail of blood, no sign of what had happened to the child who'd been wearing it. Jake picked up the shoe with shaking hands. "Daniel, we need to get help. This is bigger than a standard cave rescue." But when we turned around to head back toward the entrance, we found something that made us both stop cold. The tunnel behind us had changed. Where there had been one passage leading back toward daylight, now there were 5 different tunnels, all sloping up at different angles. The limestone walls looked exactly the same in every direction. The soft dust on the floor showed no trace of our own footprints, like we'd never walked that way at all. "That's impossible," Jake whispered. I checked my watch. We'd been in the cave for 2 hours, but the hands weren't moving. The second hand sat frozen at 12, like time had stopped working down here in the dark. The voices started again, louder now. The Patterson family calling for help, their words echoing off stone walls that shouldn't exist. But this time, I heard something else in those voices. Something that made every instinct I had scream for me to run. Those voices weren't coming from people who needed rescue. They were coming from things that wanted to lure us deeper into the mountain. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, I could hear something breathing that was way too big to be human. We stood there in that impossible place, 5 tunnels stretching away from us where there should have been one, listening to voices that couldn't be real. Jake's breathing sounded loud in the silence between the calls for help. "We're going back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Pick a tunnel and follow it up." But when we tried the first passage, it curved back on itself and dumped us right back where we started. Same thing with the second tunnel and the third. Like the mountain was playing games with us, keeping us trapped down here in the dark. The voices got louder every time we came back to the central chamber. "Please help us," the man's voice called. "We're so scared," cried the woman. And those children, sobbing like their hearts were breaking. But Jake was right to be scared. The more I listened, the more I could hear that something was wrong with those voices. They were too perfect, too clear. In a real cave, people calling for help would sound hoarse from shouting, tired from being lost. These voices sounded fresh as morning radio. "Danny?" Jake's voice cracked when he said my name. "Look at the walls." I turned my carbide lamp toward the stone, and my blood went cold. The carved symbols we'd seen earlier were spreading. Not new carvings. The old ones were getting bigger, growing across the limestone like living things, and they were glowing now, giving off a sick green light that made my eyes water. "We need to go deeper," I said, even though everything in me was screaming to run. "Those people are down there somewhere. Real or not, we can't leave without trying." Jake nodded, but I could see he was fighting every survival instinct he had. We picked the middle tunnel again and started walking into the heart of the mountain. The passage opened up after another 100 yards, and we found ourselves in a chamber bigger than any cave room I'd ever seen. Our lights couldn't reach the ceiling, couldn't find the far walls. Just darkness stretching away in all directions, Ike, we'd walked into empty space. But it wasn't empty. There were things built in that darkness. Wooden scaffolding rising up into the black overhead, built from logs that looked old as the mountain itself. Rope ladders hanging down from platforms we couldn't see. And everywhere, crude furniture carved from stone and wood. Chairs, tables, sleeping areas. "Someone's been living down here," Jake whispered. That's when I saw the bones. They were piled up neat and careful in one corner of the chamber, sorted by size and type. Human bones, but old ones, yellowed with age. Skulls with empty eye sockets that seemed to watch us. Leg bones and arm bones stacked like cordwood. And sitting on top of the pile, fresh as yesterday, was a child's backpack with Patterson written on the name tag. Jake made a sound deep in his throat, like a man trying not to be sick. The voices started up again, but now they were coming from all around the chamber. Not echoes anymore, but different voices calling from different directions. More families, more lost people, more children crying for help. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all calling from the darkness beyond our lights. "How many people you think have gone missing in these mountains over the years?" I asked Jake. But I already knew the answer. Too many. Way too many. That's when we saw the first one. It was standing at the edge of our light, just a pale shape in the darkness. Human-looking, but wrong in ways that made my brain hurt to process. Too tall, too thin, skin white as cavefish. And when it moved like smoke, like it wasn't quite solid. "Jesus Christ," Jake breathed. The thing stepped into our light, and I got a good look at it. It had been human once. Probably a man, though it was hard to tell. Naked, skin stretched tight over bones, eyes like black holes in its skull. No hair, no color to its skin at all. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth that were too sharp, too many of them. It spoke in the voice of Mr. Patterson. "Thank God you found us," it said with perfect pronunciation, even though its mouth didn't move right for the words. "We've been trapped down here for days. The children are so scared." More shapes moved in the darkness behind it. Dozens of them, all pale and wrong, all coming closer to our little circle of light. They looked like people who'd been drained of everything that made them human. Color, warmth, life itself. Jake raised his rifle, but I put a hand on his arm. "Don't waste the bullets." Because I could see now what we were dealing with. These weren't people anymore, if they ever had been. They were something else, something that had been human once but got changed by living too long in the dark under the mountain. The hollow folk. The stories were real. One of them stepped forward, smaller than the others, child-sized. It spoke in a little girl's voice, sweet as honey. "Mister, can you help us find our mommy and daddy?" But when I looked at its face, there was nothing there a child should have. Just empty spaces where eyes and nose should be, and a mouth full of needle teeth. "Jake," I said quietly, "when I say run, you run for that passage over there. The one with the wooden beams." The hollow folk were closing in now, moving like water, like fog with purpose. More of them kept coming out of the darkness, dozens, then hundreds. All shapes and sizes, all pale and empty, all speaking in voices they'd stolen from people who'd come down here looking for adventure or help or just a place to hide. The voices got louder, more urgent, a symphony of stolen words calling for help, begging for rescue, crying for mommy and daddy and anyone who might care enough to come looking. But underneath all those voices I could hear something else, something that sounded like breathing, but way too big to be coming from anything human. Something vast and old, sleeping somewhere deeper in the mountain, dreaming dreams that leaked up through the stone. And the child thing with no face reached out toward me with fingers like white twigs. "Run!" I shouted. Jake didn't hesitate. We both bolted for the passage with the wooden beams, our lights bouncing wild shadows off the walls. Behind us, the hollow folk didn't follow fast. They just flowed after us like smoke, making sounds that might have been laughter if things like them could laugh. We ran through passages that twisted and turned, always going deeper into the mountain. Our lights started getting dim, batteries running down after hours underground. And every step we took, I could feel something changing inside me. My hands looked paler in the lamplight. Jake's face was getting thin, the skin stretched tight over his cheekbones. Whatever was happening to the people down here, it was starting to happen to us too. We were becoming hollow folk ourselves. We stumbled out of the passage into another chamber, both of us breathing hard and scared down to our bones. This room was smaller than the last one, with walls that curved up into darkness overhead. But it wasn't empty. There were people here. Real people, not the pale things we'd left behind. A man, a woman, 2 children, the Patterson family, sitting around a small fire like they were camping in their own backyard. "Thank God," Jake gasped. "We found them." But something was wrong with the scene. The Pattersons sat too still, staring into the fire without blinking. Their skin had that pale, stretched look we'd seen on the hollow folk. And when the man looked up at us, his eyes were completely black. "Rangers," he said in a voice flat as old paper, "you came to rescue us." The woman smiled, but it was all wrong, too wide, showing too many teeth. "We've been waiting for you. The children are so excited." The little girl, maybe 6 years old, turned her head toward us. When she moved, I could hear her neck crack like, "Oh, Eldwood, will you stay with us forever and ever?" That's when I understood. The Patterson family hadn't been taken by the hollow folk. They'd been changed into them, turned into something else, something that looked human but wasn't anymore. Jake raised his rifle again, but his hands were shaking too bad to aim. "Daniel, what are they?" Before I could answer, another voice came from the darkness behind us, old and deep, like rocks grinding together. "They are what you will become." We turned around, and there it was. The thing the other hollow folk had been serving, the source of the breathing sounds we'd heard. It looked like it might have been human once, maybe 100 years ago, but now it was something else entirely. 9 feet tall, paper-thin, skin like old leather stretched over bird bones. Its eyes were holes in its skull that went down forever. "I am the first," it said, and its voice came from everywhere at once. "I came to these caves in 1820, running from men who wanted to hang me. I thought I would hide for a few days, then move on." It stepped closer, and I could smell it now. Old dirt and rotting leaves and something else. Something like death, but not quite. But the mountain liked me. The deep places under the earth, they were hungry. They fed on me slow, took my color and my warmth and my humanness, bit by bit. And in return, they gave me time. All the time in the world. Jake was backing away, but there was nowhere to go. The hollow folk had filled the chamber behind us, watching with their empty faces. "You take people," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You steal them from the world above." The thing that had been the first laughed, and the sound was like wind through dry bones. "I don't take anyone. They come to me. Lost campers, missing hikers, people running from their troubles. The mountain calls to them, and they answer, just like you did." I looked at Jake, and my heart sank. His skin was definitely paler now, and when he moved too slow, like he was underwater. The change was happening to both of us, had been, and happening since we entered the cave. "What do you want?" I asked. "What I've always wanted. Company, food. The mountain is hungry, Ranger. It feeds on life, on warmth, on the spark that makes humans human. But it needs willing meals, people who choose to stay, who join the family." It gestured toward the Patterson family still sitting around their little fire. They chose. Eventually they all choose. The alternative is so much worse. That's when I realized what was really happening. The hollow folk weren't just stealing people, they were farming them. Bringing them down into the caves, changing them slowly, making them into recruiters who could lure more victims with stolen voices and false promises of rescue. "The choice is simple," the first one said. "Join us willingly, and become hollow but aware. Fight us, and become hollow anyway, but lose your mind in the process." Jake was looking at his hands now, watching the color drain out of them like water running away. "Daniel," he whispered, "I can't feel my heartbeat anymore." The first one smiled with too many teeth. "The change takes 3 days for most people. You've been breathing our air for 6 hours now. Fighting it will only make the madness come faster." I thought about Tommy then, my boy who'd fallen into Widow's Creek. 3 years of believing he was dead. 3 years of guilt and bourbon and sleepless nights. But what if he hadn't drowned? What if the mountain had taken him, brought him down here, changed him into something else? "You're thinking about someone," the first one said, reading my face. "Someone you lost to the mountain, someone you might see again if you stay with us." And then I heard it. A small voice calling from somewhere in the darkness beyond the chamber. A child's voice I'd been dreaming about for 3 years. "Daddy? Daddy, is that you?" Tommy's voice. My boy, calling for me from the deep places under the mountain. "Choose quickly," the first one said. "Your friend doesn't have much time left." Jake was sitting on the ground now, his eyes starting to go black, like the Patterson family's. The change was taking him fast, maybe because he was scared, maybe because he was fighting it. I had seconds to decide. Join the Hollow Folk and maybe see my son again, or fight them and lose everything, including Jake and probably my sanity. But then I remembered something. The way the Hollow Folk had avoided the wooden beams in the passage. The way they moved around certain areas like they couldn't touch them. And I remembered stories my grandfather used to tell about things that lived in caves, things that couldn't cross running water. There had to be an underground stream somewhere in these caves. There always was in limestone country. And if I could find it, if I could get Jake to it before the change finished taking him. "I need time to think," I told the first one. It laughed again. "You have no time. Choose now." Instead of choosing, I grabbed Jake under the arms and hauled him to his feet. He was light as a scarecrow, and when I looked in his eyes, they were already starting to go dark. "Sorry, friend," I whispered, and then I set off one of my emergency flares. The red light exploded through the chamber, and every single Hollow Folk screamed like I'd set them on fire. They scattered away from the light, flowing back into the darkness like smoke in a strong wind. Dragging Jake with me, I ran for the passage that sloped down deepest into the mountain. If there was water down here, it would be at the bottom, following the natural course of the stone. Behind us, the Hollow Folk were regrouping, and I could hear the first one's voice echoing through the caves. "You cannot escape what you have already become." Maybe he was right, but I had to try. I found the water 3 levels down, in a passage so narrow we had to crawl through it on our bellies. An underground stream, cold as winter, cutting through the limestone on its way to join me river miles away. Jake was barely conscious when I dragged him to the water's edge. His skin was white as paper, his eyes gone completely black. When I splashed water on his face, he screamed like I was burning him with acid. But the scream sounded human. I grabbed him by the shoulders and shoved him headfirst into the stream. He fought me, but he was weak from the change, and I was still strong enough to hold him under for 30 seconds. When I pulled him back up, his eyes were brown again. "Daniel?" he gasped, coughing up cave water. "What happened to us?" "We got too close to something we shouldn't have messed with," I said. "Can you walk?" He nodded, though he still looked like death warmed over. The water had stopped the change, but it hadn't reversed what had already happened. Jake would never look quite the same again. Too thin, too pale, like something vital had been drained out of him forever. We followed that underground stream for 6 miles through passages that got smaller and smaller until we were crawling through spaces barely wide enough for our shoulders. The Hollow Folk tried to follow us at first, but the running water kept them back. I could hear them calling in stolen voices, begging us to come back, promising us things we'd lost. Tommy's voice called longest of all. The stream eventually led us to a sinkhole that opened to daylight. We climbed out into a world that looked exactly the same as when we'd left it, but felt completely different. The sun hurt our eyes. Normal colors seemed too bright, and every shadow looked like it might be hiding something pale and hungry. Sheriff Morrison found us walking along Highway 19 3 hours later, looking like we'd spent a week in hell, which I suppose we had. The official report said the Patterson family died in a flash flood that washed their bodies into an underground river system, the cave entrance was sealed again, this time with enough concrete and steel to stop a tank. The area was declared off-limits to camping and hiking. But I know the truth. The Patterson family is still down there, sitting around their little fire, waiting for the next group of lost campers to stumble into their web. And the first one is still there too, patient as stone, knowing that sooner or later, someone else will come looking for people who can't be found. Jake left the mountains 6 months later, moved to Florida, got a job selling insurance. He calls me sometimes, but we don't talk about what happened in Mammoth Cave. We both know there's no point. I took early retirement and moved to a cabin even deeper in the woods, away from the tourist trails and the main roads. I drink more bourbon than I should, and sometimes late at night I can still hear voices calling from the caves. Not just Tommy's voice, though his is the loudest. All of them. Everyone the mountain has ever taken, calling for rescue that will never come. The worst part is knowing that some part of me is still down there with them. Whatever makes a person human, whatever gives us color and warmth and the ability to love something more than ourselves. I left some of it in those caves. The running water saved my life, but it couldn't save all of me. Sometimes I catch myself staring at my hands, checking to make sure they still have color. Sometimes I stand in front of mirrors to make sure my reflection looks right. And sometimes on the darkest nights, I think about walking back to that sealed cave entrance with a stick of dynamite and finishing what I started. But I don't go back, because I know what's waiting for me down there in the dark. I know that Tommy's voice isn't really Tommy anymore, just something wearing his memory like a mask. And I know that if I go back, I'll never leave again. The mountain is patient. It has all the time in the world, and it's still hungry. 3 weeks ago, another family went missing from Bluestone Creek Campground. Their car was found with the engine running, FV still warm on the hood. The tracks led north toward the sealed cave entrance, and when the rangers checked the concrete barrier, they found new cracks in the steel and cement. I didn't volunteer for the search party. Some rescues aren't worth the cost of trying. My name is William Copperfield, and I need to tell you what happened to me in the mountains of Tennessee in 1969. People might not believe me, but I swear every word is true. I was 29 then, working as a forest ranger in the Cherokee National Forest. Been doing it for 6 years, ever since I got back from Vietnam. The war messed me up pretty bad. Loud noises made me jump, crowds made me nervous, and I had nightmares most nights. But up in those mountains, with just the trees and the wind, I felt okay for the first time since coming home. I knew explosives from my Army days as a combat engineer, so the Forest Service had me doing road work and bridge repairs in the remote areas where nobody else wanted to go. I liked it that way. Just me, my tools, and the quiet. That October, my supervisor, Jake Morrison, called me into his office. He was a big man with hands like ham hocks and a voice that could carry across 3 valleys. "Got a job for you, Copperfield," he said, spreading a map across his desk. "Storm last month tore up the old logging road on Copper Ridge. Need you to go up there and fix it." I looked at the map. Copper Ridge was way up in the backwoods where the old Cherokee territory used to be. The road was just a thin line on paper, probably hadn't been used for years. "How bad's the damage?" I asked. "Bad enough. Trees down, washouts, the whole mess. Take your time with it. No rush." That should have been my first warning. Jake never said, "Take your time," about anything. I loaded up my truck with tools, explosives for clearing stumps, and enough food for a week. The drive up to Copper Ridge took 3 hours on winding mountain roads that got narrower and rougher the higher I climbed. Pine trees pressed in on both sides, their branches scraping my truck like fingers trying to hold me back. The old logging road started at a rusted gate that hung open and broken hinges. I parked and walked ahead to see what I was dealing with. The storm had done a number on it all right. Fallen trees blocked the path every few hundred yards, and rain had washed out whole sections down to bare rock. But something felt wrong from the start. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, not even the buzz of insects. Just an empty silence that made my skin crawl. I set up camp near the road's beginning and got to work with my chainsaw, cutting away the fallen timber. The first day went fine, except for how the trees seemed heavier than they should have been, like they didn't want to be moved. On the second day, I started clearing out one of the washouts with my shovel, digging down to see how deep the damage went. That's when I found the first bone. It was long and white, definitely human, maybe an arm bone or leg bone. I stopped digging and stared at it, my heart beating faster. People died in these mountains sometimes, hunters, hikers who got lost. But this bone looked old, really old. I kept digging, thinking I'd find the rest of whoever this used to be. Instead, I found more bones. Lots more. They weren't scattered around like you'd expect from a body that had been here for years. They were arranged in neat rows, like someone had built the road on top of them on purpose. My hands started shaking. In Vietnam, I'd seen plenty of dead bodies, but this was different. This was like finding a grave under the highway. I should have stopped then, should have packed up and driven back to town to report it. But Jake had given me a job to do, and I needed the work. Besides, these bones looked ancient. Whatever had happened here was long over. So I kept working, telling myself the bones were probably just old Cherokee burial sites that got disturbed when they first built the road. Happens all the time in these mountains. Or so I told myself. But as the sun got lower and the shadows grew longer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. Every time I looked up, I expected to see eyes staring back at me from the darkness between the pines. That night, I ate beans from a can and tried to read a paperback book by lamplight, but I couldn't concentrate. The silence pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. Even the fire seemed quieter than it should have been, like the flames were afraid to make noise. I was just dozing off when I heard them. Footsteps. Not the soft pad of animal paws or the random crack of settling wood, but the steady, measured steps of someone walking down the road. Step, 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 coming from deeper in the mountains. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound, but the beam showed nothing but empty road disappearing into darkness. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and scared in the quiet. Nothing answered back. I sat by the fire until dawn, gun across my knees, but I never heard the footsteps again. When morning came, I walked down the road looking for tracks. The dirt was soft from recent rain, and my boots left clear prints. But where I'd heard those footsteps, there was nothing, not even a scuff mark. That should have been my second warning. The third day, I found the skull. I was working on a section where the road had been washed out completely, leaving a gap about 10 feet wide and 4 feet deep. As I cleared away the mud and rocks, there it was, grinning up at me with empty eye sockets. This one was different from the other bones, newer. The teeth were still good, and I could see where someone had filled a cavity with old-style silver. This person had died maybe 20, 30 years ago, not centuries. I sat back on my heels and tried to think. One skeleton, you might call an accident. 2 skeletons, you might call a coincidence. But I'd now found pieces of maybe a dozen different people, and they were all mixed in with the road like ingredients in a cake, I had to drive back to town and talk to Jake. But when I tried to start my truck, the engine just clicked. Battery was dead even though it had been fine the day before. I popped the hood and saw that someone had pulled loose the battery cables, not worn through or broken, pulled loose on purpose. My skin went cold. Someone had been in my camp while I was working on the road. Someone who didn't want me to leave. I put the cables back and tried again. This time the engine caught, but it ran rough, like something was wrong with the timing. Still, it would get me to town. I was backing up to turn around when I saw him, an old Cherokee man standing beside the road like he'd been waiting for me. He was probably 70 with long gray hair and skin like old leather. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, but something about him seemed ancient. I rolled down my window. "You scared me," I said. "Didn't hear you coming." "These mountains are quiet when they want to be," he said. His voice was soft but clear. "You're the one working on the road." "That's right. William Copperfield, Forest Service." He nodded. "I'm Joseph Crowfeather." My people have lived in these mountains for a long time, longer than there have been roads. I found some bones, I said, old ones mixed in with the roadbed. Thought you might know something about them. His face went serious. The bone roads. I was afraid someone would find them eventually. Bone roads. That's what my grandfather called them. Roads built from the dead. He told me the stories when I was young, but I hoped they weren't true. I turned off the engine. What stories? Joseph looked up at the ridge where the road disappeared into the trees. Long time ago, before the white men came, my people had trouble with spirits, bad spirits that came down from the high places and caused sickness and madness. The medicine men tried everything to keep them away, but nothing worked. What did they do? They made a prison, used the bones of their enemies, the ones who had violated sacred places and brought evil into the world, ground them up and mixed them into the earth, then built roads on top. The spirits got trapped inside, unable to cross over or go back. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. That's just a story, right? Joseph looked at me with eyes that were older than his face. Is it? You've been working on the road for 3 days. How do you feel? The truth was, I felt terrible. My PTSD symptoms had gotten worse since I'd been up here. The nightmares were more vivid, mixing memories of Vietnam with images of walking skeletons and empty eye sockets. I was jumpy and nervous in a way I hadn't been for months. The road was damaged in the storm, Joseph continued. Bones got exposed, patterns got broken. The prison has cracks in it now. Even if I believed you, I said, which I don't, what am I supposed to do about it? Fix it, he said simply. Put the bones back where they belong. Repair the patterns. Or the things trapped inside will get out. What things? But when I looked up, Joseph was gone. Just vanished, like he'd never been there at all. I got out and looked around, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no sound of someone walking away through the brush. I drove back to town with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Jake was in his office, feet up on his desk, reading a magazine about hunting. He looked up when I walked in. Back early, he said. Road fixed already? Jake, we got a problem up there. I've been finding human bones mixed in with the roadbed. Lots of them. His face didn't change. That's so? This isn't some old burial ground that got disturbed. Someone built that road using human bones instead of gravel, on purpose. Jake set down his magazine and looked at me for a long moment. Copperfield, you been having trouble sleeping lately? Bad dreams? The question caught me off guard. How did you know? Because every man-wit who's worked on that road has the same problem. Nightmares, jumpy nerves, seeing things that aren't there. It's the altitude. Thin air messes with your head. What about the bones? Old Cherokee burial sites. Happens all the time when you're working in the backcountry. Nothing to get excited about. Jake, I'm telling you, this is different. Someone arranged those bones in patterns, used them to build the road. His face got hard. Listen to me, Copperfield. That road needs to be fixed, and you're the man I sent to fix it. I don't want to hear any more talk about Indian ghosts or magic bones or whatever crazy ideas you're cooking up in that head of yours. You understand me? I stared at him. You know something about this. I know you got a job to do. You can either do it, or I can find someone else who will. I needed the work. My disability check from the Army wasn't enough to live on, and jobs weren't easy to come by for guys like me. Jake knew that. All right, I said. I'll finish the road. Good man. Take all the time you need. As I walked out, I heard Jake pick up his phone and dial a number. He found them, Jake said in a low voice, just like the others. I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I drove back up to Copper Ridge that afternoon with a sick feeling in my stomach. Jake knew about the bones. He'd sent other men up here before me, and they'd all found the same things. The question was why he wanted the road fixed so badly, and why he didn't care about the bones. The mountain felt different as I climbed higher. The air seemed thicker, harder to breathe, and the trees looked darker than they had that morning. By the time I reached my camp, the sun was setting behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the road. I set up my tent and got a fire going, trying to act normal, but my nerves were shot. Every sound made me jump. A branch creaking. In the wind, a rock rolling downhill, the pop of sap in the burning wood. I kept my rifle close and checked it twice to make sure it was loaded. As darkness fell, the silence came back. That unnatural quiet that made me feel like the only living thing for miles around. I tried to eat some soup, but my hands were shaking too bad to hold the spoon steady. That's when I heard the first scream. It came from somewhere up the road, high and thin like a woman in terrible pain. The sound cut through the silence like a knife, making my blood freeze in my veins. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and pointed them toward the sound. "Hello," I called. "Someone hurt up there?" The scream came again, closer this time, and I realized it wasn't human. No human throat could make a sound that raw and wild. It was something else. Something that had forgotten how to be human a long time ago. I backed toward my truck, keeping the rifle pointed up the road. The smart thing would have been to get in and drive away, but I was too scared to turn my back on whatever was out there. The screaming stopped, and in the sudden silence I heard them again, those footsteps. But now there were more of them, like a whole group of people walking down the mountain toward my camp. Step, 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 all in perfect rhythm, like soldiers on parade. My flashlight beam reached maybe 50 feet into the darkness. Beyond that, the road was black as coal, but I could hear them getting closer. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I've got a gun!" The footsteps stopped. Then, at the very edge of my flashlight beam, I saw them. They looked like people at first glance, men and women of different ages, all walking down the road toward me. But something was wrong with the way they moved, too stiff and jerky, like marionettes on strings. And their faces, God help me, their faces were holes. Empty sockets where eyes should be, gaping mouths that went too far back into their skulls. Some were missing chunks of flesh, showing bone underneath. Others looked like they'd been dead for years, skin heat hanging off them in strips. But they were walking and staring at me with those empty eye sockets. I fired a shot over their heads, the sound echoing off the mountains like thunder. The figures stopped, but didn't run or duck like living people would. They just stood there, swaying slightly like they were listening to music I couldn't hear. "What do you want?" I yelled. One of them, a woman in a tattered dress, opened her mouth and spoke. Her voice was like wind through dead leaves. "Out," she whispered. "Out." I fired again, this time right at her. The bullet passed through her chest without effect. She didn't even flinch. More figures appeared at the edge of the light. Dozens of them, all with those horrible, empty faces, all swaying in the same rhythm. The smell hit me then. Old death, like meat that had been rotting for months. I ran for my truck, fumbling with the door handle while keeping the rifle pointed behind me. The engine turned over on the third try, and I floored it, driving blind down the dark mountain road with my headlights cutting crazy patterns through the trees. In the rearview mirror, I could see them following, not running, just walking with that same steady pace, but somehow keeping up with my truck even though I was doing 40 miles an hour on the twisting road. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. Only then did I look back and see the road behind me was empty. I spent that night in a motel in town, but I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces. Those empty, hungry faces. The next morning, I went to the library and asked to see any old books about Cherokee history in the area. The librarian, a nice old lady named Mrs. Patterson, brought me a stack of dusty volumes. "Doing research?" she asked. "Something like that." Most of the books were the usual stuff about Cherokee culture and the Trail of Tears, but one, written by a local historian in the 1920s, had a chapter about something called spirit roads. According to the book, Cherokee medicine men would sometimes trap evil spirits by binding them to physical objects, usually bones from people who had committed terrible crimes. The spirits would be imprisoned in the bones, then the bones would be buried under roads or paths to keep the spirits from escaping. The book mentioned one road in particular, built in the mountains of East Tennessee around 1750, after a series of attacks by what the Cherokee called hungry ghosts, spirits of people who had died violently and couldn't find peace. The road was called *NV Koga* in Cherokee, which meant the Bone Path. I knew I'd found the right place. That afternoon, I drove to the Cherokee reservation and asked around until someone pointed me toward Joseph Crow Feather's house. It was a small place at the end of a dirt road with a vegetable garden and a couple of old dogs sleeping on the porch. Joseph was sitting in a rocking chair, like he'd been waiting for me. "You saw them," he said before I could speak. I nodded and sat down on his porch steps. "What are they?" "Spirits of the dead, the angry dead, the ones who died with hate in their hearts. My ancestors trapped them in the Bone Road 200 years ago." "Why?" Joseph rocked slowly, looking out at the mountains. "There was a time when bad things walked these hills. Settlers who killed Cherokee children for sport, soldiers who burned whole villages, men who did things so evil that when they died, their spirits couldn't rest. So the Cherokee caught them. Not caught, tricked. The medicine men gathered the bones of the worst ones and built a road, telling the spirits it would lead them to the land of the dead. But the road was a circle, with no beginning and no end. The spirits would walk it forever, never finding peace, never escaping. I thought about what I'd seen the night before, but they're not staying on the road anymore. The storm damaged it, broke the circle. Now they're trying to get out, to find new bodies to inhabit, new ways to cause harm. He looked at me with those ancient eyes. "That's why you're here. That's why you were chosen." "Chosen? Jake just assigned me the job." Joseph smiled sadly. "Your supervisor doesn't know it, but he's being guided by the same spirits. They need the road fixed, but not by just anyone. It has to be someone with blood on their hands, someone who understands violence and death." My stomach went cold. "What do you mean?" "Vietnam," Joseph said simply. "How many men did you kill in the war?" I'd never told anyone the exact number. It was something I tried not to think about. 12, I whispered. 12 souls on your conscience. 12 debts unpaid. The spirits recognize that debt. They know you're one of them. I stood up, anger flaring. "I'm nothing like those things. I was a soldier. I was following orders." "Were you?" Joseph's voice was gentle but cutting. Every single time. I opened my mouth to say yes, but the words wouldn't come. Because there had been that one time, near the end of my tour, when I'd killed a Vietnamese soldier who was trying to surrender. I'd been scared and angry and sick of watching my friends die, and when I saw that enemy soldier dropping his weapon, something dark inside me had pulled the trigger anyway. I'd never told anyone about that. Not the Army psychiatrists, not the other veterans, not even myself most of the time. "The spirits know," Joseph said. "They can smell the guilt on you. That's why they want you to fix the road. They think you'll help them escape." "Will I?" "That's up to you. You can repair the road properly using the old methods and trap them again. Or you can do what your supervisor wants and just fill in the gaps with regular gravel. That would weaken the prison even more." I sat back down, feeling dizzy. What happens if they get out? They spread. Find new HHs, hosts, possess animals first, then people. Turn the whole region into a place of madness and death. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind in the trees. "How do I fix it?" "Right?" I asked finally. Joseph reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This contains bone dust from the original medicine man who built the road. Mix it with the bones you found. Arrange them in the proper pattern and speak the binding words." "What words?" He taught me a Cherokee phrase that sounded like "Nvi Galoni Gadohi Nvadotlvi." It meant, "The bone path holds the hungry ghosts." "But there's a price," Joseph warned. "To bind the spirits properly, you need to add fresh bones to the mix. Bones from someone who dies on the road itself." "What are you saying?" "Someone has to die on that road, William. Someone has to join the spirits in their prison to make it strong enough to hold them." I stared at him. "You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about sacrifice. One life to save thousands." I got up and walked to my truck without another word. but I took the leather pouch with me. That night, I drove back up to Copper Ridge with a head full of dark thoughts. The road had to be fixed. I could see that now. The question was whether I could do it without becoming a killer. I set up camp at the same spot, but this time I built a big fire and kept my rifle loaded with silver bullets that Joseph had given me. "Won't kill them," he'd said, "but it'll slow them down." As darkness fell, they came again. More of them this time, dozens of dead figures walking down from the high mountains. They formed a circle around my camp, just outside the ring of firelight, and stood there swaying. The same woman in the tattered dress stepped forward. "Fix the road," she whispered. "Let us out." "I can't do that," I said. "You killed," she said. "Like us. You understand?" "I'm not like you." The boy in the jungle. He was trying to surrender. My blood turned to ice. She was talking about Vietnam, about the soldier I'd killed. "You wanted to kill him," she continued. "Felt good to pull the trigger. Felt powerful." "No," I said, but my voice shook. "Fix the road wrong. Let us out. We'll find you new bodies to fill, new ways to feel that power." More voices joined hers, all the dead spirits whispering together. "Kill the old Indian. Use his bones to break the circle. Kill your supervisor. He sent others here before you. He knows about us. Kill everyone who might stop us." Their voices got louder, more insistent, and I felt something dark stirring inside me. The same feeling I'd had in Vietnam, the desire to hurt something, to make the world pay for all the pain it had caused me. I raised my rifle and pointed it at the woman. "Shut up." She smiled, showing broken teeth. "Yes, that's the feeling. That's what we want." I almost pulled the trigger, almost gave in to that dark voice inside my head. But at the last second, I remembered Joseph's words and what the road was really for. I lowered the gun. "No, I won't be like you." The spirits shrieked in anger and rushed toward me. I fired the silver bullets as fast as I could work the bolt, and each one that hit a spirit sent it spinning backward. They couldn't cross the ring of firelight, but they pressed against it like wolves testing a fence. All night they tested me, whispering offers of power and revenge, showing me visions of all the people who had wronged me over the years. By dawn, I was exhausted and shaking, but I hadn't given in. As the sun rose, the spirits faded back into the shadows. But I knew they'd be back the next night and every night after until I fixed the road one way or another. I had a choice to make. I spent that day working on the road, but not the way Jake wanted. Using Joseph's instructions, I carefully gathered all the bones I could find and arranged them in specific patterns, spirals and crosses and shapes that hurt to look at directly. I mixed Joseph's bone dust with the old bones, creating a paste that I used to fill the gaps in the road. But it wasn't enough. The spirits were getting stronger, and I could feel the prison weakening. Every hour that passed, more of them escaped from the damaged sections of road. That evening, as I was finishing up my work, Jake Morrison arrived in his truck. He got out and looked around at what I'd been doing, his face getting redder by the minute. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, pointing at the bone patterns. "I'm fixing the road," I said. "This isn't fixing, it's some kind of Indian mumbo-jumbo. I told you to fill in the washouts with gravel, not play with old bones." "Jake, you know what this road really is. You've sent other men up here before me." His face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The spirits told me. They said you know about them." Jake's hand moved toward the gun on his belt. "You're talking crazy, Copperfield. The altitude's gotten to you, just like it got to the others." "What others?" "The men I sent up here before you. They all came back talking about ghosts and Indian curses. Had to fire every one of them. Or they quit because they saw the truth." Jake pulled his gun and pointed it at me. "You're going to fix this road the right way, with gravel and asphalt, or you're not going home at all." That's when the sun set, and they came. This time there were hundreds of them, pouring down from the mountains like a gray river. They surrounded Jake's truck, pressing in on all sides, reaching through the windows with skeletal hands. Jake screamed and fired his gun wildly, but the bullets passed through the spirits without effect. They pulled him from the truck and dragged him toward the road. "William," he yelled, "help me!" I had a choice. Let the spirits take Jake and use his death to strengthen the road, or try to save him and risk letting them all escape. I chose to be human. I charged into the crowd of spirits with my silver bullets, driving them back long enough to grab Jake and pull him toward my cam. Fire. The flames kept the spirits at bay, but barely. "What are those things?" Jake gasped. "The prisoners in your Bone Road," I said. "They want out." We held out until dawn, taking turns watching while the other tried to rest. When the spirits faded with the sunrise, Jake looked like he'd aged 10 years. "This has been going on for decades, hasn't it?" I asked. Jake nodded weakly. "My grandfather was the one who first found the road back in the 1920s. Told me stories about it, but I thought they were just stories. When I became supervisor, I started getting reports from workers about strange things happening up here. I kept sending people to fix it, hoping someone would, make it stop. It can't stop, Jake. Not unless we fix it properly." "How?" I looked at the bone patterns I'd laid out, still not complete. "Someone has to die on the road. Fresh bones to strengthen the binding." Jake stared at me. "You mean murder?" "I mean sacrifice." We both knew it had to be one of us. The spirits wouldn't accept just anyone. It had to be someone who understood the road's purpose, someone willing to join the prison to keep it strong. "I'll do it," Jake said quietly. "Jake." "No, listen. This is my fault. I've been covering this up for years, sending men up here without telling them the truth. I got people hurt, maybe killed. It should be me." Before I could stop him, Jake walked out onto the road and knelt down in the center of the bone pattern. He pulled out his service pistol and looked at me. "Fix the road, William. Do it right this time." He pulled the trigger. I won't describe what happened next, except to say that I used Jake's bones the way Joseph had taught me, mixing them with the old Cherokee bone dust and placing them in the gaps in the pattern. As I worked, I spoke the binding words over and over. Nvi galoni gadohi nvadotlvi. The effect was emitted. I ate. The temperature dropped 20 degrees and the wind picked up, howling through the trees like something in pain. The bones in the road began to glow with a cold blue light, and I heard the spirits screaming as they were pulled back into their prison. But Jake's spirit was different. When he appeared, he looked peaceful, not angry like the others. He nodded at me once, then took his place as guardian of the Bone Road, keeping the other spirits in line. I finished the job just as the sun was setting. The road looked normal now, just old asphalt and gravel, but I could feel the power underneath, the ancient binding that held back centuries of rage and hunger. I drove back to town and reported that Jake had been killed in an accident while inspecting the roadwork. Nobody questioned it. Men died in the mountains all the time. 2 weeks later, I quit the Forest Service and moved to North Carolina. But I kept in touch with Joseph Crow Feather, and once a year I drive back to Copper Ridge to check on the road. Make sure the binding is holding. Make sure the patterns haven't been disturbed. It's been 30 years now, and the road is still strong. The spirits are still trapped, and Jake's ghost still stands guard. Sometimes when I visit, I see him walking the bone path in the moonlight, making sure none of the hungry dead escape to trouble the living. That's why I'm telling you this story. Because someday, I won't be able to make those visits anymore, and someone else will need to know the truth about the bone roads of Copper Ridge. Someone will need to keep watch. The mountains are full of old roads, old secrets, old prisons that most people don't understand. But they're there, and they're necessary, and they need guardians. If you ever find yourself driving through the Cherokee National Forest and you see an old logging road that doesn't appear on any map, do me a favor. Don't try to fix it. Just keep driving and don't look back. My name is Marcus Bloodworth, and I've been testing water for 20 years. People think it's boring work, but water tells stories. It tells you about the land, the animals, and sometimes things you don't want to know. I work for the Forest Service in Jefferson National Forest, Virginia. Most days I check streams, test wells, and make sure the water stays clean. It's 1988, and folks are just starting to worry about acid rain and factory waste. My job is to catch problems before they hurt people. That Tuesday in October started normal enough. Coffee at 5, truck loaded with testing gear by 6. The leaves were turning red and gold, and the morning air had that crisp bite that meant winter was coming. I was heading to Hellbender Hollow, a remote area about 30 miles from the nearest town. The hollow got its name from the giant salamanders that lived in the streams. Hellbenders are ugly things, bigger than your forearm, with slimy skin and tiny eyes. But they're good for something. They only live in clean water. If you find hellbenders, you know the stream is healthy. I'd been to the hollow maybe 6 times in my career. It's hard to reach, just an old logging road that turns into a hiking trail. The springs there feed 3 different streams, and all that water eventually makes it to people's wells downstream. That's why I test it. But something was wrong when I got there that morning. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not bad exactly, but metallic. Like when you get a nosebleed and taste copper in your mouth. The second thing was the silence. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I parked by the main spring and got out my testing kit. The water looked normal from a distance, clear and cold, bubbling up from deep underground like always. But when I got close, I saw the red. Not rust red like you get from iron in the water. This was darker, thicker. It swirled in the current like blood. I told myself it was just minerals. Iron oxide can turn water all kinds of colors. I'd seen orange streams, yellow streams, even green ones. Red wasn't impossible, but this red was different. I filled my sample bottles and ran the basic tests right there. pH was normal. Temperature was normal. But when I looked at the water through my magnifying lens, I saw something that made my hands shake. Cells. Round red cells floating in the water like tiny balloons. Blood cells. I ran the test 3 times. Same result every time. This wasn't iron oxide or rust or any mineral I'd ever seen. This was actual blood, mixed with spring water, flowing up from deep underground. I followed the red stream downhill, taking samples every 100 yards. The blood got thicker as I went down. By the 3rd sample point, the water looked like cherry Kool-Aid. By the 4th, it was almost black. That's when I found the first dead fish, a trout, maybe 8 inches long, floating belly up in a pool. Its eyes were cloudy white, and its gills were clogged with something dark and thick. Then I saw another, and another. In 20 years of water testing, I'd seen fish kills before. Pollution, disease, lack of oxygen. There are lots of things that can kill fish. But these fish looked wrong. Their bodies were too perfect, like they'd just died that second. No decay, no smell, no flies. I bagged one of the fish and headed back to my truck. I needed to call this in, get a team out here, maybe contact the health department. This wasn't just a water quality problem anymore. This was something that could make people sick. But when I got back to the main spring, I stopped cold. The water was running clearer now, still red but not as dark. And there was something else, something that made my skin crawl. Footprints in the mud around the spring. Bare feet, human-sized, but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, and there were only 4 of them on each foot. The prints led into the water and disappeared. I looked around the hollow, suddenly aware of how quiet it still was, how alone I was, how far from help. That's when I heard it, a splash from downstream like something big entering the water. I grabbed my radio, but all I got was static. No cell towers out here, and the mountains blocked most signals anyway. I was on my own. Another splash, closer this time. I packed my gear fast and headed for the truck. Whatever was happening in Hellbender Hollow, it was bigger than contaminated water, and I had the feeling it was just getting started. I drove straight to the ranger station and called my supervisor, Tom Bradley. Tom's been with the Forest Service for 30 years, and he's seen everything, or so he thought. Blood in the water, he said when I finished my report. Marcus, You sure you're not seeing things? Maybe it's just heavy iron content. Tom, I tested it. These are actual blood cells, and there are dead fish everywhere, but they look preserved. Long pause. Preserved how? Like they just died, but I think they've been dead for days, maybe weeks. No decay at all. Another pause. Okay, I'm sending Jenny Morrison out there with you tomorrow. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. And Marcus? Yeah? Take pictures of everything. If this is real, we need documentation. Jenny Morrison was new, maybe 25, fresh out of college with a degree in environmental science. She was eager and smart, but she'd never seen anything like what was waiting in Hellbender Hollow. We got there early the next morning. The smell was stronger now, that metallic, bloody smell that seemed to stick in your nose. But there was something else, too. Something sweet and rotten underneath. Jesus, Jenny whispered when she saw the red water. That's not minerals. We split up to cover more ground. Jenny went upstream to find where the contamination started. I went downstream to see how far it sprouts. The blood was moving through the whole system now. 3 streams, all running red. The dead fish were everywhere. Trout, bass, even crayfish lying motionless in the shallows. All of them perfectly preserved, like they'd been dipped in some kind of chemical. I was collecting samples at the 3rd stream when I heard Jenny scream. It wasn't a scared scream or a surprise scream. It was pure terror, the kind of sound that comes from somewhere deep in your bones when you see something that shouldn't exist. I ran toward the sound, crashing through brush and jumping over fallen logs. I found her standing waist deep in one of the red streams, staring down at the water with her mouth open. Jenny, what is it? She pointed at the stream bottom. Look. I waded in beside her and looked down through the red water. At first, I didn't see anything special. Just rocks and mud and... oh, God. There was a hand sticking up from the stream bed. A human hand, pale and bloated, with fingers spread like it was reaching for help. But the weird thing was how preserved it looked. The skin was white and soft, like it had just gone under. How long has this been here? Jenny whispered. I looked closer. The hand was attached to an arm, and the arm disappeared into the mud. This was a whole body, buried in the stream bottom. I don't know. Could be days, could be years. The preservation is... I stopped. I was about to say impossible, but that seemed like the wrong word for everything happening here. We waded to shore, and I called it in on the radio. This time I got through to the sheriff's office. They promised to send someone out, but it would take hours to get a team into the hollow. We should wait for them, Jenny said. Yeah, we should. But we didn't wait. We both felt it. Whatever was happening here was getting worse. The red in the water was darker now, and the smell was getting stronger. We needed to find the source. We followed the main stream uphill, past where I'd tested yesterday, into parts of the hollow I'd never seen. The water got redder as we climbed, and stranger things started appearing on the banks. More bodies. Not fresh like the hand in the stream, but not old either. A woman in a dress that looked like it was from the 1950s. A man in overalls with a long beard. A child in clothes I couldn't identify, maybe from 100 years ago. All of them perfectly preserved. All of them arranged carefully on the banks like someone had placed them there. Marcus, Jenny's voice was shaking. These people, they're from different time periods. She was right. The clothes, the hairstyles, even the way the bodies were positioned. They were from different decades, maybe different centuries. But they all looked like they'd died yesterday. We kept following the stream uphill until we found where it came from. The main spring wasn't coming from the ground anymore. It was coming from a crack in the rock face, maybe 6 feet wide and tall enough to walk through. Red water poured out of the crack like a wound in the mountain. It's a cave, Jenny said. We stood there looking at that dark opening, both knowing we should turn around and wait for help. But the cave was calling to us somehow, not with sound, but with something deeper, like it wanted us to come inside. We need to see where this leads, I said. Are you crazy? We should wait for the sheriff. But even as she said it, Jenny was walking toward the cave entrance, and I was following her. The cave was bigger inside than it looked from outside. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and the walls were smooth, like they'd been carved by water over thousands of years. The red stream flowed along the floor, and we could hear it echoing deeper into the mountain. We had flashlights, but they seemed weak in all that darkness. The air was warm and humid, and that sweet, rotten smell was stronger here. We followed the stream deeper into the cave, our lights dancing on wet walls covered with strange marks. Not writing exactly, but patterns that looked almost like symbols. "Marcus," Jenny whispered, "do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. At first, just the sound of water flowing, then something else, a rhythmic sound, like breathing, or like a heartbeat. "We should go back," I said. "Yeah." But we kept walking deeper into the cave, following that red stream toward whatever was making that sound. Because sometimes when you're scared, the only thing you can do is find out what's scaring you. The stream led us to a place where the cave opened up into a huge underground room. Our flashlights couldn't reach the far walls, but we could see what was in the middle. A pool of red water, maybe 50 feet across. And floating in that pool, bodies. Dozens of them. All perfectly preserved, all from different time periods. Some were floating face up, staring at the ceiling with glassy eyes. Others floated face down, their hair spreading out like dark weeds. And at the edge of the pool, something was moving in the water. Not human. Too big. Too wrong. It lifted its head and looked at us with eyes like black holes. That's when we ran. We ran through that cave like our lives depended on it, which they probably did. Behind us, something splashed in the pool, something big moving through water. Our flashlights bounced wildly as we ran, showing glimpses of wet walls and that red stream flowing beside us. We made it out of the cave and didn't stop running until we reached my truck. Jenny was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "What was that thing?" she gasped. "I don't know." But that wasn't completely true. In those few seconds when the creature looked at us, I'd felt something. Like it was trying to get inside my head, trying to tell me something. It was old, really old, and it was hungry. We drove back to town fast, both of us quiet, both trying to make sense of what we'd seen. The sheriff's cars passed us going the other way, 3 vehicles full of deputies and emergency workers heading to Hellbender Hollow. "Should we turn around?" Jenny asked. I thought about those preserved bodies floating in the red pool, about the thing with black hole eyes that was waiting in the dark. "No," I said. "Let them see it first. Then maybe they'll believe us." But when we got back to the ranger station, Tom Bradley was waiting with bad news. "The team can't get through," he said. "Roads washed out about 2 miles from the hollow. Flash flood, they think." Flash flood? I looked out the window. It had been clear all day. "From where?" Tom shrugged. "Creek's running high. They'll try again tomorrow when the water goes down." I knew it wasn't a flash flood. Whatever was in that cave had closed the road, keeping people away from its home. But I couldn't say that without sounding crazy. Jenny and I spent the rest of the day writing our report. We left out the part about the creature, sticking to facts about contaminated water and preserved bodies. But even the facts sounded impossible. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black hole eyes staring at me from the red pool, and I kept hearing something, a voice in my head, whispering words I couldn't quite understand. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Jenny. "Marcus, I think it's in my dreams." "What?" "That thing. I keep dreaming about it, and it's trying to tell me something. It says it's been waiting a long time." I sat up in bed. "Waiting for what?" "I don't know. But Marcus, in the dream, it knows my name. It knows about my family, my childhood, everything. And it says, I belong with the others." "Jenny, listen to me. Stay away from Hellbender Hollow. Whatever that thing is, it's dangerous." "I know. But Marcus, I want to go back." Even though I'm scared, part of me wants to go back to that cave. I knew what she meant. I felt it too. A pulling sensation, like something was calling me back to the hollow. But I also knew it was wrong. Whatever was in that cave didn't want to help us. It wanted to add us to its collection. Jenny, promise me you won't go back there alone. Okay, I promise. But something in her voice told me she was lying. The next morning, Jenny didn't show up for work. I called her apartment, her cell phone, her parents. No answer anywhere. I drove to her place and found her car gone. I knew where she'd gone. The road to Hellbender Hollow was clear now. No flood, no washout. Whatever had blocked it yesterday was gone. I drove fast, hoping I wasn't too late. Jenny's car was parked by the main spring. The door was open, her keys still in the ignition. Her testing kit was scattered on the ground like she'd dropped it and run. The red stream was flowing darker than ever, almost black now. And there were more bodies on the banks, not old preserved ones, but fresh ones. People in modern clothes who looked like they'd just laid down to rest. I followed the stream to the cave, calling Jenny's name. My voice echoed back from the darkness, but there was no answer. Inside the cave, I could hear that rhythmic sound again, like breathing, like a heartbeat. It was stronger now, more urgent. And underneath it, another sound, singing. A woman's voice, soft and sad, singing something that sounded like a lullaby. I followed the sound deeper into the cave, past the strange symbols on the walls, past the point where I'd turned around yesterday. The singing got clearer as I went deeper, and I recognized the voice. It was Jenny. The cave opened up into that huge underground room again, and I saw the red pool with its collection of floating bodies. But now there were more of them, dozens more, all perfectly preserved, all staring up at the ceiling with glassy eyes. And sitting on a rock at the edge of the pool was Jenny. She looked normal at first. Same clothes, same face, same blonde hair. But when she turned to look at me, her eyes were different. They were black now, black like holes in the world. "Hello, Marcus," she said in a voice that wasn't quite her own. "I've been waiting for you." "Jenny, what happened to you?" She smiled, but it was wrong somehow. Too wide, too knowing. "I met the Bloodkeeper," she said. "He's been here so long, Marcus. Hundreds of years, maybe thousands. He's been keeping people safe, preserving them, taking care of them." She gestured to the bodies floating in the pool. "They're not dead, Marcus. They're sleeping, dreaming beautiful dreams while the Bloodkeeper watches over them." I backed toward the cave entrance, but something splashed in the pool behind Jenny. Something big rising from the red water. The Bloodkeeper was huge, maybe 10 feet tall, with pale skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. Its arms were too long, ending in hands with 4 fingers each. And its eyes. Its eyes were black holes that seemed to suck in light. When it spoke, the voice came from Jenny's mouth. "You taste the water," it said. "You understand what I offer. Perfect preservation. No decay, no death, no pain. Just peaceful sleep in my collection." "These people aren't sleeping," I said. "They're trapped." Jenny laughed. "Trapped? Marcus, I can hear their dreams. They're happy. They're safe. The Bloodkeeper loves them." The creature moved through the water toward me, and I could feel something pulling at my mind. It wanted me to step into that red pool, to join the others, to sleep forever in perfect preservation. Part of me wanted to do it. 20 years of testing dirty water, watching pollution spread, fighting a losing battle against progress. It would be so easy to just stop fighting and rest. But I thought about the Hellbender salamanders, those ugly old creatures that could only live in clean water. They were gone now, killed by the Bloodkeeper's contamination. This thing wasn't preserving life, it was destroying it. I pulled out my emergency radio and hit the panic button. Every ranger station and the area would get the signal. Help was coming. The Bloodkeeper hissed and moved faster through the water. "Jenny," I called, "fight it! This isn't you!" For just a second, her eyes cleared. The black faded, and I saw my partner looking back at me with terror. "Marcus," she whispered. "Run!" Then the black returned, and it wasn't Jenny anymore. I ran. I made it out of the cave just as the first rescue helicopters appeared over the hollow. But something was wrong. The red stream was rising, flowing faster and higher than before. The Bloodkeeper was flooding the area, turning the whole hollow into one giant pool of contaminated water. I grabbed my radio. "This is Bloodworth. The water level is rising fast. Whatever you do, don't let anyone touch the red water." But it was too late. I could see people in the distance. Sheriff's deputies, emergency workers, maybe some hikers who'd wandered into the area. They were all walking toward the rising water like sleepwalkers. The contamination was spreading through the air now, not just the water. Anyone who breathed it in was being called to join the Bloodkeeper's collection. I ran to higher ground and tried to think. 20 years of water management experience had to be good for something. How do you stop a flood? You change where the water goes. I remembered the maps I'd studied of this area. The cave system wasn't just one big room. It was connected to other caves, other underground streams. If I could redirect the flow, maybe I could drain the Bloodkeeper's pool and weaken it. But first I had to get back into that cave. The water was knee-deep now and rising fast. I could see people wading into it, their eyes going black as they breathed in the contamination. Once they were in the water, they stopped moving and just stood there, waiting. I put on my emergency respirator, the kind we use around chemical spills, and waded back toward the cave. The red water was warm against my legs, and even through the respirator I could smell that sweet, rotten smell. Inside the cave, the water level was rising too. Soon the whole place would be flooded, and the Bloodkeeper would have an underground lake to store its collection. I could hear Jenny singing again, that same sad lullaby. Her voice echoed through the cave system, mixing with the sound of flowing water and that rhythmic breathing heartbeat of the creature. I'd brought demolition charges, part of my emergency kit for clearing debris from streams. Not much, but maybe enough to collapse some passages and change the water flow. The main chamber was half flooded now. Bodies floated everywhere, bumping against each other like logs in a river. And in the center of it all, the Bloodkeeper moved through the water like it owned the place. Which I guess it did. Jenny was still sitting on her rock, now surrounded by red water. She looked at me with those black hole eyes and smiled. "You came back," she said, in that voice that wasn't hers. "The Bloodkeeper is pleased." "Let her go," I said. "She doesn't belong to you." The creature laughed, a sound like water rushing over rocks. "She belongs to me now," it said through Jenny's mouth, "as do all the others, as do you." I could feel it trying to get into my head again, that pulling sensation. But the respirator was helping. Without breathing the contaminated air, I could think more clearly. I started placing charges around the chamber, trying to look like I was just exploring. The Bloodkeeper watched me with interest, but didn't try to stop me. Maybe it thought I was already under its control. "You taste my water for 20 years, it said. "Little tastes, but I know you. I have been waiting." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean 20 years? Jenny's smile got wider. "Every stream you test, every sample you take. Small amounts of my essence, but enough. You have been connected to me all this time, Marcus Bloodworth. You just did not know it." I thought about all the water I'd tested over the years, all the streams that flowed down from these mountains. The Bloodkeeper had been contaminating the water supply for decades, maybe centuries. Not enough to kill people outright, but enough to mark them, to call them when it was ready. "That's why you became a water tester," Jenny said. "That's why you came to this hollow. I called you here." I finished placing the charges and backed toward the cave entrance. The water was chest deep now, and more bodies were floating past me. Some of them looked familiar. People from town, people I'd met over the years. "You cannot fight the flood," the Bloodkeeper said. "I am the flood. I am the spring that never runs dry, the well that never empties. I am the source." I pulled out the detonator. Maybe, I said, but I know how to dam a stream. I hit the button. The explosion shook the whole mountain. Rock fell from the ceiling and cracks appeared in the chamber walls. Water rushed in new directions as passages collapsed and new ones opened. The Bloodkeeper's perfect pool turned into chaos. The creature screamed, not through Jenny's voice this time, but with its own voice. A sound like rushing water and breaking stone, and the death cries of 1,000 drowning animals. The water level started dropping as it found new paths through the rock. The Bloodkeeper's power was tied to its pool, and without the pool, it was getting weaker. But it wasn't dead, and it was angry. Bodies in the water started moving, not floating, but swimming. The Bloodkeeper was animating its collection, turning preserved corpses into weapons. They came after me with jerky movements, like puppets on strings. I ran for the cave entrance as dead hands grabbed at me from the water. Behind me, the Bloodkeeper was screaming in rage, its voice echoing through collapsing passages. I made it outside just as the whole cave system collapsed. Rock and dirt and centuries of contaminated water came pouring out of the mountain, carrying the Bloodkeeper's collection with it. But in all that chaos, I saw Jenny. The real Jenny, not the puppet with black eyes. She was fighting her way through the rushing water, fighting to get free. I waded in after her, ignoring the contamination, ignoring the risk. She was my partner, and I wasn't leaving her behind. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward shore as the mountain continued to collapse around us. Her eyes were clearing, the black fading back to normal blue. Whatever hold the Bloodkeeper had on her was breaking. We made it to high ground just as the last of the cave system came down. The red water was flowing clear now, carrying away decades of supernatural contamination. The Bloodkeeper's scream faded to a whisper, then to silence. But I knew it wasn't over. Things like that don't die easy. The official report blamed the incident on underground gas pockets and unstable rock formations, a tragic cave-in that killed several people and contaminated the local water supply with naturally occurring minerals. The area was closed to the public indefinitely. Jenny recovered, mostly. The doctors said she had some kind of brain infection that caused hallucinations and memory loss. She doesn't remember much about what happened in the cave, which is probably for the best. She transferred to a different forest, somewhere far from Virginia's mountains. I stayed. Someone had to watch the hollow to make sure it stayed quiet. Most of the contamination cleared up within a few weeks. The streams ran clean again, and even some wildlife started coming back. But not the hellbenders. Those old salamanders never returned to the hollow. They know something the rest of us don't. Every few months, I test the water. It always comes back normal now. pH balanced, no unusual minerals, no trace of blood. But sometimes, when I'm collecting samples late in the evening, I hear something in the distance, singing. A woman's voice, soft and sad, echoing from deep underage. Round. The Bloodkeeper is still down there somewhere, trapped under tons of rock but not dead. Maybe it can't die. Maybe creatures like that just sleep for a while and wait for their chance to come back. I've started keeping detailed records of every strange incident in the forest, unusual animal behavior, unexplained disappearances, reports of contaminated water. There's a pattern forming, and it's not random. The contamination is spreading through underground channels, following the old water table toward populated areas. The Bloodkeeper is learning, adapting, finding new ways to call people to join its collection. I'm getting close to retirement now, but I can't leave. Not while that thing is still out there. I've trained my replacement, shown him what to look for. But I don't think he believes me. Not really. Not yet. Maybe that's for the best. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share. Last week I got a call about red water in a stream about 50 miles east of the hollow. Iron contamination, they said. Probably nothing to worry about. But I'm packing my testing kit anyway, because I know what red water really means in these mountains. And I know the Bloodkeeper is still hungry. The hellbenders are gone, but I'm still here. Still testing the water. Still watching for signs. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can still hear it singing in the dark. My name is Elizabeth Frostworth, and I've been a park ranger at Mount Mitchell for 15 years. Before that, I spent 3 years on the Olympic ski team until I tore my knee up pretty bad. Most people think being a mountain ranger is all about giving directions to tourists and cleaning up campsites. They're wrong. When you work the highest peak east of the Mississippi, you learn real quick that mountains don't care about your plans. I was checking weather reports in my cabin that October morning when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaky. Ranger Frostworth, this is Dale Murphy from the hiking group that went up yesterday. We're stuck up here. The weather turned real bad, real fast. I looked outside. The sky was gray, but nothing looked too scary. What's your location, Dale? Near the summit, there's snow everywhere. Thick snow. My thermometer says it's 20 below. That made me stop. 20 below? Dale, it's 45 degrees down here. I know how it sounds, but 3 of our people are showing signs of frostbite. Sarah can barely walk. I grabbed my heavy coat. Mountain weather could change fast, but this sounded wrong. Really wrong. Stay put. Keep everyone together and try to stay warm. I'm coming up. The drive to the trailhead should have taken 20 minutes. I made it in 15, my truck sliding on patches of ice that hadn't been there an hour before. The temperature dropped with every mile up the mountain road. By the time I reached the parking area, I could see my breath. I'd climbed Mount Mitchell in every season, every type of weather. I knew this mountain like my own backyard, but something felt different as I started up the trail. The forest was too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed muffled. Halfway up, I found the first sign that this wasn't normal weather. A deer lay frozen solid beside the trail, its eyes wide open, covered in a thin layer of ice. I'd never seen an animal freeze that fast, not even in the worst winter storms. My radio crackled. Elizabeth, this is base. We're getting reports of severe weather all around the summit area. Helicopter rescue is grounded. Copy that, Jim. I'm continuing on foot. Be careful up there. Weather Service says this storm came out of nowhere. I kept climbing. The temperature kept dropping. My gear was rated for 20 below, but the cold seemed to cut right through it. Ice formed on my mustache and eyebrows. My fingers started going numb even inside my heavy gloves. Then I saw the footprints. They were huge, bigger than any boot I'd ever seen, and they were filled with ice that looked blue in the gray light. The prints led straight up the mountain, right toward where the hiking group was trapped. I followed them for a quarter mile before they just stopped, right in the middle of the trail, like whatever made them had just vanished into thin air. That's when I heard the screaming. The screams came from above, echoing off the mountain walls in a way that made my skin crawl. I ran up the trail as fast as I could in the deepening snow. The air was so cold now that each breath felt like swallowing needles. I found Dale's group huddled under a rock overhang about 200 yards from the summit. 5 people, all experienced hikers, all looking scared out of their minds. Thank God, Dale said when he saw me. He was a big guy, the kind who usually stayed calm in emergencies. Now his hands were shaking. Sarah's in bad shape. Sarah was a woman in her 30s, wrapped in every piece of spare clothing the group had. Her lips were blue, and ice crystals had formed in her hair. But what really worried me was her stare. She was looking at something none of the rest of us could see. It's so beautiful, she whispered. Red. The ice palace. Can't you see it? I knelt beside her. Classic hypothermia. She was seeing things. We need to get her down the mountain right now, I told Dale. All of you. We tried, said another hiker, a young man named Pete. Every time we start down the trail, the storm gets worse, like it doesn't want us to leave. I checked my thermometer, 30 below. That was impossible at this elevation, but my equipment didn't lie. What about the other group? Dale asked. The search and rescue guys who came up here this morning. My blood went cold. What search and rescue team? 4 rangers came through about 2 hours ago, said they were looking for someone, headed straight for the summit. I grabbed my radio. Base, this is Elizabeth. Do we have a SAR team on the mountain? Static. Then Jim's voice, worried. Negative. You're our only personnel up there. I looked at Dale. Describe these rangers. Big guys. Really big. wearing heavy winter gear. They didn't talk much, just asked if we'd seen anything unusual. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Which way did they go? Pete pointed toward the summit. Up there. But that was right before the worst of the storm hit. They're probably frozen solid by now. I made a decision. I'm going to check on them. You all start heading down. Stay together. Go slow. And don't stop for anything. If the weather gets worse, keep going anyway. What if those weren't real rangers? Sarah asked. She was looking right at me now, more alert than she'd been since I arrived. I didn't have an answer for that. The trail to the summit was covered in 3 feet of fresh snow, but I could still make out those huge footprints heading up. 4 sets now, all the same impossible size. I followed them with my flashlight, even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. The storm clouds had turned day into early evening. I found the first body 50 yards from the summit. It was one of the fake rangers, frozen in a kneeling position, his head tilted up like he was looking at something in the sky. Ice covered him completely, but I could see through it well enough to tell this wasn't someone I knew. His face was wrong somehow, too angular, like it had been carved instead of born. The second body was 20 yards further, same position, same ice coating, same wrong-looking face. I found the third and fourth at the summit itself, kneeling in front of what looked like a throne made of ice. The throne was huge, easily 12 feet tall, with designs carved into it that hurt to look at. The ice was so clear it was almost like glass, and it seemed to glow with its own pale light. That's when I heard the voice. "You are not welcome here." The words came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing inside my head as much as in the air around me. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in seconds. This is my domain, my mountain, my winter. I spun around looking for whoever was talking, but saw only the 4 frozen figures in that terrible throne. Leave now, or join them. Ice began forming on my jacket, my gloves, my face mask. Not the normal ice you get from cold weather, but thick, fast-growing ice that crackled as it spread. I ran. I made it halfway down the mountain before I had to stop. My legs were shaking so bad I couldn't trust my footing on the icy trail. I'd been dealing with mountain emergencies for 15 years, but nothing had ever scared me like that voice. I radioed base camp. "Jim, we need to evacuate the entire area. Something's very wrong up here." "Elizabeth, what's your status?" "I found 4 bodies at the summit. They're not our people. And the weather, Jim, it's not natural. I'm reading 40 below at 5,000 feet. Long pause. "Are you sure about the temperature reading?" "I'm sure. And there's something else. Some kind of structure up there, made of ice. It's—" I stopped. How do you explain something like that over radio? "Elizabeth, head back to base. We'll sort this out in the morning." "No. There are still people on this mountain. That hiking group I went to help. They should have reached their cars by now, but—" Scream echoed up from below, human, terrified, and cut short. I ran toward the sound, sliding and stumbling down the steep trail. The temperature kept dropping. My breath came out in thick clouds that froze and fell like snow. Ice formed on the trees around me with sounds like breaking glass. I found Pete from the hiking group at a switchback in the trail. He was frozen solid, standing upright, his arms reaching toward something I couldn't see. His face was locked in an expression of wonder instead of fear. Dale and the others were nowhere to be found. My radio crackled with static, then that voice came through the speaker. "I told you to leave." The radio went dead. The temperature dropped to 50 below. Ice started forming on the trail in front of me, but not random ice. It was making shapes, patterns, pictures. I could see images of people frozen in place, of a giant figure made of snow and ice, of Mount Mitchell covered in permanent winter. I backed away from the ice pictures, but they followed me, spreading across rocks and trees. The whole mountain was becoming a canvas for something that wanted to show me what it could do. That's when I saw the others. Dale stood about 30 yards away, perfectly still, ice covering him from head to toe. Sarah was next to him, and 2 other hikers I didn't recognize, all frozen, all facing the same direction, back toward the summit. But their eyes were still moving. They were still alive in there, trapped in ice but conscious. Sarah's eyes found mine, and I could see the terror in them. "The Winter King grows stronger," the voice said, and this time it seemed to come from the frozen people themselves. "Each soul claimed adds to his power. Each death brings longer winter." The ice under my feet began to crack and shift. I realized it was forming words in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Asterisk, submit, serve, J, in the eternal winter. I turned and ran again, but the cold followed me. Ice formed on the trail faster than I could navigate it. My heavy winter gear was failing. My fingers and toes were going numb despite my expensive boots and gloves. Worse, I was starting to see things. Beautiful things. A palace of ice at the summit, with rooms carved from crystal and snow. Servants made of winter itself, graceful and eternal. A throne where someone could rule over endless winter storms, where the mountain would be yours forever. I shook my head hard. Hypothermia hallucinations. Had to be. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I made it to my truck just as full darkness hit. The engine turned over, but barely. The heater blew cold air. Ice was forming on the inside of the windshield. As I drove down the mountain road, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw something that made my blood freeze colder than the air around me. Mount Mitchell was glowing with pale blue light, and the glow was spreading down the mountainside like spilled paint. Trees were turning white as the light touched them. The road behind me was becoming a ribbon of ice. Whatever was happening up there, it wasn't staying on the mountain. By the time I reached the ranger station, I could see my breath inside the heated building. Jim looked at me like I'd gone crazy when I told him what I'd found. "Elizabeth, you've been up there all day in extreme cold. You're showing signs of exposure. Maybe what you saw—" "Check the weather stations," I said. "Check the temperature readings from the summit." He did. His face went pale. 60 below. But that's impossible. "Call the Cherokee Reservation," I told him. "Ask to speak to the firekeeper. Ask him about the Winter King." Jim stared at me. "The what?" "Just do it. And Jim, start evacuating everyone within 10 miles of the mountain. Tonight." Through the window I could see us, the snow beginning to fall in the valley for the first time in October in over 50 years. The Cherokee firekeeper's name was Thomas Crow Feather, and he arrived at the ranger station just before midnight. He was an old man, probably in his 70s, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He took one look at the weather reports and nodded like he'd been expecting this call his whole life. "My grandfather told me about the Winter King," he said. His grandfather told him, "We've been waiting for this day for over 100 years. "Waiting for what day?" I asked. "The day the mountain got angry enough to wake him up." Thomas spread a hand-drawn map on my desk. It showed Mount Mitchell and the surrounding area, but with Cherokee place names I'd never heard before. Long time ago, when the world was younger, something came down from the far north. Something made of cold and hate and endless winter. It tried to freeze the whole world, starting with our sacred mountains. Our people fought it with fire and sacred rituals. We couldn't kill it, but we put it to sleep. "What woke it up?" Jim asked. Thomas looked out the window at the falling snow. "Too many people on the mountain. Too much disrespect. The Winter King feeds on cold and death, but he also feeds on the fear of people who don't belong there." "The hiking groups," I said. "The tourists. We've had record numbers this year. Every person who dies up there makes him stronger. Every person who feels that cold, that fear, it's like food to him." Thomas pulled out a bundle wrapped in deer hide. "But there's still a way to fight him." Inside the bundle were what looked like ordinary sticks and dried plants, but when Thomas unwrapped them, the room got warmer. "Sacred fire materials, blessed by 7 generations of firekeepers. If we can get these to the summit, perform the warming ritual at his source of power, we might be able to put him back to sleep." "We?" I looked at this old man who had to be at least 75. "Thomas, I can't ask you to. You can't do it without me. The ritual has to be performed by someone who carries the old knowledge." He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Besides, I've been preparing for this my whole life." Jim grabbed my arm. Elizabeth, you can't be serious. The temperature up there will kill you both. If we don't try, it'll kill everyone for 100 miles, I said. Look at the weather reports. The cold is spreading. In 2 days, it'll reach Asheville. In a week, Charlotte. I was right, and we all knew it. The weather station computers were showing temperature drops that shouldn't exist, spread patterns that made no scientific sense. Thomas and I loaded up with every piece of extreme cold weather gear we could find. Military Arctic survival suits, chemical heat packs, emergency shelters. We looked like we were heading to Antarctica, not North Carolina. The drive up the mountain road was like entering another world. Everything was white and still. Trees groaned under the weight of ice. The truck's engine sounded different in the extreme cold, sluggish, like it was fighting to keep running. We made it to the trailhead, but that was as far as the truck would go. The trail was buried under 5 feet of snow, and more was falling. How far to the summit? Thomas asked. 2 miles, straight up. We started climbing. The cold was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. Even with all our gear, I could feel it seeping in. My fingers went numb within the first 100 yards. My face felt like it was being slapped with frozen metal. But Thomas kept going. This old man, who should have been sitting by a warm fire, climbed through snow that came up to his chest without complaint. We found more frozen people along the way. Hikers, campers, even some Park Service vehicles with rangers still sitting inside, turned to ice statues. All of them facing the summit, like they'd been called there. He's collecting them, Thomas said when we stopped to Appalachian, estimated building an army of winter. As we got closer to the summit, the ice formations became more elaborate. Pillars and arches, stairs carved from solid ice, walls that stretched between the trees. It was becoming a city made of winter, and at the center of it all, that throne. But now someone was sitting on it. The Winter King was 12 feet tall, made of ice so clear you could see through him, but somehow solid enough to cast shadows. His eyes were like blue fire, and when he looked at us, the temperature dropped another 20 degrees. "You brought me a firekeeper," he said, and his voice made the ice around us crack. How thoughtful. Thomas began unwrapping the sacred fire materials. "Elizabeth, I need you to keep him talking. The ritual takes time." "What do you want?" I shouted at the Winter King. "I want what was stolen from me. I want this mountain, and all the mountains covered in eternal winter. I want the warm-blooded creatures to know their place, frozen and still, serving as monuments to the power of cold." "Why?" I asked, though I was really just buying Thomas time. "Because I am winter itself. Before your people came with their fires and their heat, winter ruled this world. Ice covered everything. It was perfect, pure, clean." Thomas was arranging sticks and dried plants in a pattern around himself. Even in the extreme cold, I could see small wisps of smoke beginning to rise from the materials. "Your people forgot winter's power," the Winter King continued. "They built their homes, started their fires, pushed back the cold with their arrogance. But I never forgot. I waited, and now I am strong enough to take back what was mine." The sacred fire materials burst into flame. Real flame, warm and bright, in the middle of all that ice and cold. The Winter King screamed, and the sound shattered ice formations for hundreds of yards in every direction. "Now, Elizabeth," Thomas shouted, "help me complete the ritual." The sacred fire spread faster than any normal fire should, racing across the ice formations and melting them in seconds. The Winter King rose from his throne, towering over us, his ice body crackling with fury. "You cannot banish me again," he roared. "I am too strong now." But Thomas kept chanting in Cherokee, and the fire kept spreading. I could feel warmth for the first time in hours. Real warmth, not just the absence of deadly cold. "Elizabeth, take some of the burning branches," Thomas called to me. "Spread the fire to his power sources." I grabbed several burning sticks and ran toward the ice throne. The Winter King reached for me with hands like frozen tree branches, but when the sacred fire touched him, he pulled back with a scream that echoed across the entire mountain. I threw the burning branches at the base of the throne. The ice began to melt immediately, and as it did, I could hear voices. The voices of all the people who'd been frozen, trapped inside the ice. "Set them free," Thomas shouted. "The fire will break his hold." I ran from frozen figure to frozen figure, touching them with the sacred flames. Dale, Sarah, Pete. They all began to thaw, gasping and crying as warmth returned to their bodies. The fake rangers melted away completely, like they'd been made of nothing but ice and malice. The Winter King was getting smaller. As each person was freed, as each piece of his ice palace melted away, he seemed to shrink. "This is not over," he said, but his voice was weaker now. "Winter always returns. I will sleep, but I will not die. And when your people forget again, when they take the mountain's power for granted again, I will wake." Thomas finished his chanting. The last of the ice palace collapsed, and the Winter King faded away like morning frost in sunlight. The snow stopped falling. The temperature began to rise. Within an hour, it was back to normal October weather, chilly but not deadly. We helped the rescued hikers down the mountain. Most of them remembered very little about being frozen, which was probably for the best. Sarah kept asking about the ice palace, but convinced herself it had been a hypothermia hallucination. The official report blamed everything on a freak weather system. Climate change, they said. Unusual atmospheric conditions that created localized temperature drops. The missing rangers were explained as bureaucratic confusion. There had never been a rescue team sent up the mountain. But Thomas and I knew better. I kept the job at Mount Mitchell, but things changed. I learned Cherokee, and Thomas taught me some of the old ways. We set up monitoring stations around the mountain, not for weather, but for the kinds of changes that might wake the Winter King again. Every winter, when the first snow falls on the summit, I climb up there with sacred fire materials, just in case. Thomas is getting older, and someday the responsibility will be mine alone. The Winter King was right about one thing: winter always returns, and people forget. They forget that mountains have their own rules, their own powers, their own ways of dealing with disrespect. But I remember, and as long as I'm here, as long as someone keeps the old knowledge alive, Mount Mitchell will stay just a mountain. Most of the time. Sometimes on the coldest nights, I still hear that voice carried on the wind, promising that eternal winter will return. When I do, I build a fire and keep it burning until dawn. So far, it's been enough. So far. My name is Melissa Hartwell, and I've been a forest ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 12 years now. Before that, I was a detective in Baltimore, but after my partner got killed in a drug bust gone wrong, I couldn't stand the city anymore. The mountains called to me. They promised peace, quiet, and simple problems like lost hikers and illegal campers. I should have known better. The mountains keep their own secrets. It was October 15th, 1984, when Sheriff Coleman called me about the missing band. The air had that sharp bite that meant winter was coming, and the leaves were turning those brilliant colors that make tourists drive up from D.C. just to take pictures. 5 musicians went up to record an album, Coleman said over the radio. His voice crackled with static and something else. Worry. Maybe fear. Been 3 days since anyone heard from them. The band was called Mountain Echo, and they'd rented old Jake Morrison's cabin up near Blackwater Falls. It was a good spot for recording, Jake always said. Quiet. Real quiet. Maybe too quiet. I loaded my Jeep with the usual search gear and headed up the winding mountain road. The trees seemed to lean in closer than normal, their branches reaching across the path like they were trying to grab something. I shook off the feeling. After 12 years in these woods, I knew when my imagination was running wild. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by massive hemlock trees. Jake had built it back in the 50s, and it still had that solid, honest look that older buildings get when they're made to last. But something felt wrong the moment I parked. The band's van was still there. Their equipment trailer, too. No tire tracks leading away. No signs anyone had left in a hurry. I knocked on the cabin door. "Hello? Forest Service." Nothing. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. Coffee, tears. Ups sat on the table, still half full. A sandwich had one bite taken out of it. The recording equipment hummed quietly in the corner, red lights blinking like tiny eyes. But no people. Anywhere. I walked through each room calling out, but the only answer was my own echo bouncing off the walls. In the main room, their instruments lay scattered around like the musicians had just stepped outside for a minute. A fiddle here, a guitar there, a bass leaning against the wall. All expensive stuff. The kind of gear you don't just abandon. Then I saw the tape recorder. It was still running, the reels slowly turning. I hit the stop button and rewound it a bit, then pressed play. The sound that came out made my skin crawl. It was definitely Mountain Echo. I recognized their style from the local radio station, but there were other voices too. Harmonies that didn't match any of the 5 band members. Voices that seemed to come from somewhere far away, like they were singing from the bottom of a well. And underneath it all, I could swear I heard the sound of wind through trees. I ejected the tape and slipped it into my pocket. Evidence. Though evidence of what, I wasn't sure yet. Outside, I started a proper search pattern around the cabin. The ground was soft from recent rain, perfect for tracks. I found boot prints leading away from the cabin toward the tree line, but they just stopped after about 50 yards. Stopped dead, like the people making them had just vanished into thin air. That's when I heard it. Faint, but definitely there. Music coming from deep in the forest. The music was beautiful and terrible at the same time. It pulled at something deep in my chest, made me want to walk toward it without really thinking about why. I forced myself to stop and get my bearings. This was how people got lost in the woods. They followed sounds that weren't really there, or were there but not where they seemed to be coming from. But this wasn't in my head. My equipment picked it up too. The sound meter on my belt showed levels way above background noise. I followed the music deeper into the forest than I'd ever been. The trees here were old, really old, the kind of hemlocks that were already giants when the first settlers came through. Their branches wove together overhead like a green roof, blocking out most of the sunlight. The music got stronger as I walked. It wasn't just one instrument now, but a whole orchestra. Fiddles, guitars, banjos, and voices blending together in harmonies that made my heart ache. Beautiful music. The kind that makes you want to cry and dance at the same time. I should have turned back. Every instinct I'd learned in 12 years of police work was screaming at me to get out of there. But the music, God, the music was so beautiful. I came to a clearing I'd never seen before, and that was impossible. I knew these woods like my own backyard, but here was a perfect circle of grass surrounded by the biggest trees I'd ever seen, and in the center of the clearing, hanging from the lowest branch of a massive oak, was Tommy Fletcher. I knew him from the photo Sheriff Coleman had shown me, the fiddle player for Mountain Echo, 24 years old, from somewhere down in Kentucky. But something was wrong with the way he hung there. His arms were positioned like he was still playing his fiddle, even though his hands were empty. His face was peaceful, almost happy, like he'd died in the middle of the most beautiful song he'd ever heard. And when the wind blew through the trees around him, I swear I could hear fiddle music. I called it in on my radio, but only got static. No surprise. I was deep in the mountains now, probably out of range of any tower. I'd have to hike back to get help. But as I started to examine Tommy's body more carefully, I realized I wasn't alone in the clearing. The trees were making music, not just the normal sound of wind through leaves, real music, harmonies and melodies that seemed to respond to each other like the trees were having a conversation in a language made of song. I looked at my watch. It was 2:30 in the afternoon when I'd found Tommy, but the light in the clearing looked like sunset. I checked my watch again. 6:45. I'd lost 4 hours and had no memory of what happened to them. The music from the trees was getting louder, more insistent. And underneath it, I could hear something that made my blood freeze. Voices calling my name. Melissa. Melissa. Come closer. I ran. I ran through the forest like something was chasing me, crashing through undergrowth and scraping myself on branches. The music followed me, getting louder and more beautiful with every step. When I finally reached my Jeep, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition, but the engine started, and I drove down that mountain road faster than I'd ever driven in my life. That night, lying in my own bed with all the lights on, I could still hear the music. And worse, I could feel myself humming along. I should have called for backup from outside the county. Should have gotten state police involved, or even the FBI. People don't just vanish, and they sure don't end up hanging from trees positioned like they're playing invisible instruments. But I didn't. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the way that tape kept calling to me from my desk drawer, the way I kept finding myself humming melodies I'd never heard before. 2 days later, I went back. This time I brought Tom Bradley with me. Tom was another ranger, been working these mountains for 20 years. If anyone could help me figure out what happened to Mountain Echo, it was him. "You sure about this location?" Tom asked as we hiked toward the clearing. "I've been all through this section, and I don't remember any clearings." Neither had I, until 2 days ago. But my GPS coordinates were solid, and the path was right where I remembered it. A trail that wasn't on any of our maps, winding through trees that seemed to lean in and listen as we passed. Music started when we were still half a mile away. Tom heard it too. I could see it in the way he tilted his head and slowed down. "That's some fine playing," he said. "Didn't know we had musicians camping up here." "We don't," I told him. The closer we got, the more beautiful the music became, and the more worried I got about the dreamy look that was spreading across Tom's face. Tommy Fletcher was still hanging from the oak tree, but he wasn't alone anymore. Bobby Martinez, the guitar player, I don't know how to describe what had happened to Bobby. He was sitting with his back against a massive hemlock tree, his arms wrapped around the trunk like he was hugging it, but the tree was hugging him back. Roots had grown up from the ground and wound around his legs. Branches had somehow twisted down and woven through his arms. He was still alive. His eyes tracked toward us as we approached, and his mouth moved like he was trying to say something. But instead of words, music came out. Guitar music, like his voice had become strings, and his breath had become fingers plucking them. "Jesus Christ," Tom whispered. Then he started humming along with the sound Bobby was making. "Tom, don't." I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. "Can't you hear how beautiful it is, Melissa? God, I haven't heard music like this since I was a kid." That's when I noticed the other trees. They were all making music now, swaying in harmony even though there wasn't any wind. The whole clearing had become an orchestra, with Bobby and Tommy as the featured performers, and Tom was walking toward them like he wanted to join in. I tackled him, brought him down hard onto the grass and tried to pin him, but Tom was bigger than me, and the music was making him strong. He threw me off and kept walking toward the trees. "The music, Melissa, can't you feel it? It's calling us home." Something moved in the shadows between the biggest trees. A figure, tall and thin, conducting the forest orchestra with long, graceful arms. When it turned toward us, I saw a face that might have once been human, but was now something else. Something made of bark and leaves and old, old music. Tom walked right up to one of the singing trees and placed his palms against its trunk. The moment he touched it, roots erupted from the ground around his feet. I shot at the conducting figure. My service pistol barked 3 times, and my bullets tore chunks of bark from its chest. But it just smiled and kept conducting, and the music got louder and more insistent. Tom was sinking into the tree now, his legs disappearing into the trunk like it was quicksand. But he was smiling, and guitar music was starting to come from his throat. I needed something to break the spell, something harsh and ugly and unmusical. I pulled out my emergency whistle and blew it as hard as I could. The sharp, piercing shriek cut through the forest symphony like a knife through silk. Every tree in the clearing stopped singing at once. The conductor figure stumbled backward, its hands clutched to its head. And Tom stopped sinking into the tree. "Run!" I grabbed Tom's hand and pulled him away from the trunk. His legs came free with a sound like tearing roots. "Run! And don't stop!" We ran through the forest while the trees screamed behind us. Tom spent 3 days in the hospital in Elkins. The doctors couldn't explain why his legs looked like they'd been wrapped in vines, or why he kept humming melodies that made the nurses cry. But he was alive, and he was human, and that was more than I'd expected. On the fourth day, I went back to the clearing alone. I know how stupid that sounds. But I had to finish it. 3 people were still missing, the rest of Mountain Echo, and I was pretty sure I knew where they were. This time I came prepared. I brought every noisemaker I could find, air horns, whistles, even a portable fire alarm. If beautiful music was the weapon, then ugly noise was my defense. The forest was silent when I arrived at the clearing. Not the normal quiet of a woods in autumn, but the complete absence of sound. No birds, no insects, no wind through the leaves. Just silence so thick it felt like walking through cotton. Tommy Fletcher and Bobby Martinez were still there, but they'd changed. Tommy's body had grown into the oak tree, his arms becoming branches, his hair turning into leaves. Bobby had merged completely with the hemlock. I could see his face in the bark, peaceful and smiling. But they weren't alone. 3 more trees had grown up in the clearing since my last visit, trees that hadn't been there before. Trees with faces I recognized from the photographs Sheriff Coleman had shown me. The rest of Mountain Echo. All of them transformed into living instruments. Their bodies became part of the forest's eternal orchestra. The conductor stepped out from behind the largest tree. Up close, I could see it was made of pieces of different people, all woven together with bark and vine and music. Dozens of faces showed through its surface, all the musicians who'd been drawn to this place over the years, maybe over the centuries. "You can't stop the music," it said, and its voice was a harmony of all those faces speaking at once. "The forest needs to sing. It's been singing since before your people came to these mountains." "People aren't instruments," I said, my hand on the fire alarm's trigger. "Everyone is an instrument," the conductor replied. "Some just need help finding their true voice." The trees began to sing again, softly at first, then louder. The most beautiful music I'd ever heard, sad and joyful and ancient all at once. Music that told the story of every person who'd ever loved these mountains, every song that had ever echoed through these valleys. I felt myself taking a step toward the singing trees, then another. The music was calling to something, deep inside me, promising peace and beauty and an end to all the pain I'd carried since my partner died in Baltimore. My finger was on the alarm trigger, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. The music was too beautiful to destroy. That's when I heard another voice join the forest symphony. Tom Bradley, somewhere behind me, humming along with the trees. He'd followed me back to the clearing. "Tom, no!" I spun around to see him walking toward the conductor with that same dreamy expression he'd had before. But seeing Tom in danger broke whatever spell the music had on me. I hit the fire alarm. The shrieking electronic wail shattered the forest symphony like glass. Every tree in the clearing writhed and twisted, their musical voices turning to screams of pain and rage. The conductor figure began to come apart, faces and limbs separating from its body like it was made of wet clay. "You can't. The music must. The forest needs." But its voice was fragmenting too, becoming a dozen different voices all talking at once. Tom stumbled and fell, but he was himself again. The fire alarm battery died, but the damage was done. The conductor was nothing but scattered pieces now, and the trees had gone silent. In the sudden quiet, I heard something new. A rumbling, like thunder underground. The earth in the clearing was splitting open, long cracks running between the transformed trees. "We need to go," I told Tom. "Right now." We ran as the clearing collapsed behind us, the ancient trees falling with crashes that shook the whole mountain. The official report says that Mountain Echo died in a flash flood that washed out their campsite. The bodies were never recovered, which happens sometimes in these mountains. Water can carry things a long way, or bury them so deep they never surface. Tom transferred to a different forest, said he couldn't stand being around trees anymore, always listening for music that wasn't there. Last I heard, he was working in Nevada, where the only things that grow are sagebrush and Joshua trees. The clearing is gone now. When the Forest Service survey team went up there a month later, They found nothing but a sinkhole full of broken trees and churned earth. We declared it a geological hazard and put up warning signs. But I still patrol that area. Someone has to make sure nobody else goes looking for the perfect place to record an album. I can't listen to music anymore. Any music. Even humming makes my skin crawl and my hands shake. The doctors say it's trauma-related anxiety, and maybe they're right. But sometimes on quiet nights when the wind blows through the hemlocks just right, I swear I can still hear them singing. And sometimes I catch myself humming along. The mountains keep their secrets, but they don't keep them buried forever. Music wants to be heard. Beauty wants to be shared. And somewhere in these ancient forests, something is still calling to people who love music enough to die for it. So if you're ever driving through West Virginia and you hear about a perfect, quiet place to record an album, somewhere deep in the Monongahela National Forest where the acoustics are supposed to be amazing, don't go. Just don't go.